In the early years of the 20th century, on March 7, 1904, in the historic town of Halle an der Saale, a boy named Reinhard Tristan Eugen Heydrich was born into a home filled with music. His father, Bruno Richard Heydrich, was a composer and opera singer who founded a conservatory. His mother, Elisabeth Krantz, came from a cultured and disciplined background. The house echoed with violin practice and piano rehearsals. Order, precision, and performance were constants in his childhood. From an early age, Reinhard excelled. He was academically gifted, serious beyond his years, and highly disciplined. He became an accomplished violinist, performing difficult compositions with clinical accuracy. He also fenced competitively and swam with intensity. Yet beneath the cultivated exterior lay insecurity. False rumors circulated that his family had Jewish ancestry, based partly on his grandmother's surname, Süß. In a society steeped in rising ethnic nationalism, such whispers carried weight. He was mocked. He withdrew. The humiliation lingered. Germany after World War I was a wounded nation. Hyperinflation devoured savings. Political violence stalked the streets. National pride had collapsed under the Treaty of Versailles. Like many young men, Heydrich absorbed the anger of the era. He joined nationalist groups and dreamed of military prestige. The Navy became his path. In 1922, he entered the Reichsmarine as a cadet. He advanced steadily and earned a reputation for discipline and ambition. But in 1931, his career collapsed. After breaking an engagement promise and refusing to marry the woman involved, he was dismissed for conduct unbecoming an officer. For a proud man raised on structure and honor, the expulsion was devastating. Unemployed in a country spiraling into depression, he was bitter, humiliated, and searching for purpose. That search led him to Lena von Osten, an ardent supporter of the rising National Socialist movement. She believed in Adolf Hitler's vision and saw opportunity in the chaos of Weimar Germany. She encouraged Reinhard to apply to the Schutzstaffel, the SS, led by Heinrich Himmler. When Heydrich met Himmler in 1931, he exaggerated his intelligence experience. Given minutes to outline how he would build a political intelligence service, he sketched an organizational concept on the spot. Himmler was impressed. That improvised blueprint became the Sicherheitsdienst, or SD, the intelligence arm of the SS. From that moment, Heydrich's ascent was meteoric. He transformed the SD into a web of informants, dossiers, and surveillance networks. Nothing escaped its reach, not rival political parties, not members of the Nazi Party itself. Information became a weapon, and Heydrich wielded it with precision. His cold efficiency earned him both fear and trust within the regime. In 1934, during the Night of the Long Knives, he helped compile the execution lists that eliminated Ernst Röhm and the leadership of the SA. The purge consolidated Hitler's power and elevated the SS above all other paramilitary forces. Heydrich had demonstrated his value: ruthless, organized, indispensable. By the late 1930s, his power extended across Germany's security apparatus. He coordinated with the Gestapo, merging intelligence and secret police into a unified engine of repression. In November 1938, during Kristallnacht, he sent instructions to police authorities. Synagogues were to burn, Jewish businesses were to be destroyed, thousands of Jewish men were to be arrested, but non-Jewish property must remain untouched. The chaos was not spontaneous, it was orchestrated. When war erupted in 1939, Heydrich's authority expanded further. He organized the Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units that followed the German army into Poland and later the Soviet Union. By the end of 1941, hundreds of thousands had been murdered in mass shootings across Eastern Europe. Entire communities were eradicated in forests and ravines. The killings were methodical, bureaucratically recorded, and reported up the chain of command. In January 1942, Heydrich chaired a meeting at a lakeside villa in Berlin, the Wannsee Conference. 15 officials gathered. Coffee was served. In 90 minutes, They discussed the coordination of what they called the final solution to the Jewish question. Deportations, labor classifications, extermination logistics, genocide reduced to administrative language. The machinery of mass murder was streamlined. In September 1941, Adolf Hitler appointed Heydrich acting Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia. In occupied Prague, he combined calculated terror with calculated efficiency. Resistance leaders were executed swiftly, thousands were arrested, informant networks spread through society. At the same time, industrial output increased under his rule. Workers received improved rations to maintain productivity. Brutality and economic incentive worked hand in hand. He rarely traveled with heavy escort. He drove through Prague in an open-top Mercedes, confident in his authority. That confidence would prove fatal later in his life. On the other side, in London, far from the occupied streets of Prague, the Czechoslovak government in exile faced an unbearable dilemma. Their homeland had been dismantled. Their president, Edvard Beneš, operated from borrowed offices. Their army existed only in fragments, scattered across Britain, North Africa, and the Soviet Union. If they did nothing, the world might accept that Czechoslovakia had ceased to exist. They needed a statement written in blood. The men selected for that statement were not aristocrats or famous commanders. They were soldiers shaped by collapse. So Jozef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš was chosen for the mission. Jozef Gabčík was born in 1912 in the small Slovak village of Poluvzy to a working-class family. He trained as a locksmith before joining the Czechoslovak army. By temperament, he was quiet, disciplined, and practical, a man who fixed things with his hands and endured hardship without complaint. When Germany dismembered Czechoslovakia in 1939, Slovakia became a Nazi-aligned puppet state. Gabčík refused to serve it. He fled across borders, first into Poland, then through France, eventually reaching Britain after France fell in 1940. Escape was not romantic. It meant abandoning home, family, certainty. It meant choosing exile over submission. On the other side, Jan Kubiš was born in 1913 in Moravia, came from a modest rural background. His father died when he was young. Responsibility arrived early in his life. He trained as a butcher before entering military service. Those who knew him described him as steady, reliable, less fiery than others, but deeply loyal. Like Gabčík, he escaped occupation, fighting briefly in France before evacuation to Britain. They were not lifelong friends before the war. They were bound by displacement. In Britain, they trained alongside other exiled Czechoslovak troops under British supervision. They drilled in demolition, handguns, sabotage, close combat. They learned to navigate by stars, to forge documents, to disappear into cities they once called home. Operation Anthropoid was not chosen lightly. The British Special Operations Executive supported it, but the final decision rested with the Czechoslovak leadership. Some advisors opposed the plan, fearing savage reprisals. Others argued that without visible resistance, their nation would be politically erased after the war. Gabčík was initially selected alongside another soldier, Karel Svoboda. But when Svoboda suffered a serious head injury during parachute training, he was replaced by Jan Kubiš. The choice was deliberate. Both men had combat experience. Both had proven psychologically resilient under stress. Both were physically capable and willing to accept near-certain death. This was not a mission designed for survival. Before departure, they were issued forged papers, cyanide capsules for suicide in case of capture, and final instructions. They knew the stakes. They knew the likely cost to civilians. And they went anyway. On the night of December 28th to 29th, 1941, they boarded a British Halifax bomber and flew back toward the country that had already been taken from them. They were not professional assassins. They were displaced soldiers choosing to become weapons. When Gabčík and Kubiš landed in the snow-covered countryside east of Prague, nothing had gone according to plan. The blizzard had pushed the aircraft off course. Instead of landing near Pilsen as intended, they touched down near Nevízdy. Disoriented, cold, and carrying equipment they could barely afford to lose, They buried their parachutes in frozen ground and moved cautiously through unfamiliar terrain. Every farmhouse light in the distance could mean shelter or betrayal. Within days, they made contact with the Czech resistance. The underground network was fractured, infiltrated, and terrified. The Gestapo's presence was constant. Informants were everywhere. Entire families had disappeared for far less than harboring assassins. Yet people helped them. Clerks, factory workers, teachers, priests, ordinary citizens opened their homes, knowing execution was the price if discovered. The resistance moved the two men constantly between safe houses. A spare bedroom one week, a cellar the next, a back room above a shop. They learned to sleep lightly, to speak softly, to memorize exits. During those months, they studied Heydrich with obsessive precision. They mapped his daily routine, departure from his villa in Panenské Břežany, the drive into Prague Castle, the absence of heavy escort. His arrogance was their opportunity. Unlike other senior Nazis, Heydrich believed fear protected him more than bodyguards ever could. The team debated methods. Derailing his train was considered, but risked civilian casualties. Shooting from a distance was impractical in the city. Stretching a cable across a road was rejected. Each plan carried uncertainty. Each failure would mean torture and exposure of the entire resistance network. Time pressed heavily on them. Winter turned to early spring. The longer they waited, the greater the risk of discovery. The resistance leadership grew anxious. London wanted results. Beneš needed proof that Czechoslovakia still fought. In the safe houses, tensions simmered beneath silence. Gabčík grew quieter as the day approached. Kubiš wrote letters he knew might never be sent. They both understood that survival was unlikely. Capture was worse than death. They carried cyanide not as symbolism, but as insurance. Outside, Prague functioned under occupation. Trams ran, factories operated, children walked to school. And through it all, Heydrich tightened his grip. Executions announced publicly, informants rewarded, resistance crushed. The contrast was unbearable. Ordinary life under extraordinary terror. By May 1942, the ambush site had been chosen, a sharp hairpin turn in the Liben district where Heydrich's car would be forced to slow. The decision was final. There would be no second attempt. For 5 months, they had lived as shadows. Now they would step into daylight. The morning of May 27, 1942, dawned clear over Prague. Reinhard Heydrich left his residence in Panenské Břežany as he had many times before. He wore his uniform with casual authority. His green Mercedes convertible rolled forward, top down despite the tension of occupation. At the wheel sat his driver, SS Oberscharführer Johannes Klein. There was no armored escort, no convoy. Heydrich believed fear was armor enough. At approximately 10:30 a.m., the car approached the sharp bend in the Liben district, a tight hairpin turn that forced vehicles to slow almost to a crawl. It was the one point along his route where speed could not protect him. Up the road, Jozef positioned himself as lookout. As the Mercedes appeared, he flashed a small mirror toward the waiting assassins. A brief glint of sunlight, the signal. Gabčík stepped from behind cover. He wore an overcoat concealing a British-made Sten submachine gun. He moved directly into the street as the car slowed. He raised the weapon and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The gun jammed. The cheap wartime design, rushed into mass production, failed at the decisive second. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Heydrich's car rolled almost to a stop. Instead of ordering the driver to accelerate away, Heydrich did something that would seal his fate. He stood up. Furious, he ordered Klein to halt the vehicle and reached for his pistol. Gabčík struggled with the malfunctioning weapon. From the opposite side of the road, Jan Kubiš acted. He hurled a modified British anti-tank device toward the rear of the car. The explosion tore through the Mercedes side panel. The blast ripped upholstery apart, sending fragments of metal, glass and horsehair padding into Heydrich's body. Shrapnel pierced his spleen and diaphragm. Smoke filled the street. Klein fired. Heydrich, wounded but conscious, attempted to pursue Gabčík, firing wildly before collapsing against a fence. Blood soaked through his uniform. Civilians scattered in panic. The assassins fled in opposite directions. Gabčík abandoned the useless Sten and escaped through side streets, eventually boarding a tram to blend into the city. Kubiš, dazed by the blast and injured by shrapnel, mounted a bicycle and disappeared into Prague's maze of alleys. Behind them, the architect of terror lay gravely wounded. An alarm was raised immediately, and Heydrich was rushed to the hospital. At Bulovka Hospital, surgeons operated for hours. They removed fragments of metal and debris. For a moment, it appeared he might survive. Himmler flew in to visit. Hitler raged in Berlin at the humiliation. But infection set in. Fragments of horsehair upholstery had carried bacteria deep into Heydrich's wounds. Despite sulfonamide treatment, septicemia spread. Fever rose. Organs began to fail. On June 4, 1942, 8 days after the attack, Reinhard Heydrich died at the age of 38. The man many believed could one day succeed Himmler, perhaps even rival Hitler, was gone. In Berlin, flags were lowered. A state funeral was held. Hitler called him the man with the iron heart. In Prague, silence fell. The storm had only begun. Within hours of Heydrich's death, Prague became a city under siege. Roadblocks appeared overnight. SS patrols flooded the streets. Posters promised vast rewards for information, millions of Reichsmarks, protection, amnesty. Entire neighborhoods were sealed and searched. Apartments were torn apart. Thousands were detained. The Gestapo worked without pause. The resistance network that had sheltered the assassins began to fracture under pressure. Arrests led to interrogations. Interrogations led to torture. Torture led to names. And then came betrayal. Karel Čerda, a member of another parachute unit dropped months earlier, stepped forward. Fear and the promise of reward overcame him. He provided names, addresses, fragments of the underground web. It was enough. By June 18, 1942, intelligence pointed to one final refuge, the Church of Saints Cyril and Methodius in Prague. Beneath the church, hidden in the crypt, Gabčík, Kubiš, and 5 other paratroopers had taken shelter with the help of Orthodox clergy. At dawn, nearly 750 SS troops and Gestapo officers surrounded the church. The first assault began above ground. Bullets tore through icons and stone pillars. The defenders fired back from choir lofts and narrow corridors, holding off wave after wave. The gunfire echoed through the nave, splintering wood and shattering glass. Civilians nearby were forced indoors as the siege intensified. Eventually, the fight narrowed to the crypt below. The surviving paratroopers retreated into the underground chamber. Thick stone walls, limited light, one narrow opening. The Germans brought heavier weapons. They fired through small windows. They hurled grenades. When that failed, they pumped tear gas into the crypt. When that failed, firefighters were ordered to force water inside, attempting to drown them out. Water rose around the men's boots. For hours they resisted. Ammunition dwindled. The air thickened. There would be no rescue. They knew what awaited them if captured: public execution after torture, and further reprisals against civilians. One by one, they made their decision. When German troops finally breached the crypt, they found bodies, not prisoners. Gabčík and Kubiš were dead among their comrades. The battle had lasted nearly 7 hours. Outside, the cost was only beginning. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler demanded exemplary punishment. Entire families were arrested without evidence. On June 10, 1942, the small village of Lidice was encircled under false suspicion of aiding the assassins. The men were separated and executed in groups. The women were deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Most of the children were sent to extermination facilities. Only a few selected for Germanization survived. The village was burned, dynamited, and bulldozed. Even the cemetery was destroyed. Its name was removed from maps. Nearby, Lázaki met a similar fate. Across Bohemia and Moravia, more than 1,000 people were executed in reprisals. Thousands more were imprisoned. Operation Anthropoid had struck at the heart of the Nazi elite. The regime answered with terror, meant to extinguish resistance forever. Yet something unexpected happened. Instead of silencing Czechoslovakia, the assassination forced the world to acknowledge it. Britain formally annulled the Munich Agreement. The government in exile gained renewed legitimacy among the Allies. Across occupied Europe, the message spread quietly. Even the most feared men were not untouchable. Heydrich's death did not stop the machinery of genocide. The camps continued to operate. The deportations intensified. But one of its chief architects was gone, felled not on a battlefield, but on a city street by two exiled soldiers who had chosen defiance over safety. Reinhard Heydrich rose from a cultured musical household to become one of the most powerful and feared figures in the Third Reich, a man who turned intelligence files into instruments of death and bureaucracy into genocide. He believed himself protected by power. In the end, it was a bend in the road, a jammed gun, and the resolve of ordinary men that brought him down. History rarely offers clean victories. Operation Anthropoid was not clean. It was costly, it was tragic, it was devastating, and it proved that even in the darkest systems of terror, resistance could still reach the very top. In the aftermath of Operation Anthropoid, the consequences rippled far beyond Prague. The cost of defiance was staggering. Families obliterated, villages erased, thousands imprisoned or executed. Lidice and Lezaki became permanent reminders of the Nazis' capacity for vengeance. Yet, amid this horror, the courage of Gabčík, Kubiš, and their comrades endured. Their sacrifice proved that tyranny, no matter how absolute it seemed, had a limit. The assassination of Heydrich sent shockwaves through the Nazi hierarchy. Hitler, who had once regarded the death of a single official as trivial, realized that even the inner circle was vulnerable. Security protocols tightened. Fear became pervasive, even among those accustomed to wielding it. The world saw that calculated courage could strike at the very heart of oppression.